the entire story of Jurassic Park is an allegory for a Marxist revolution.
Manifesto of the Communist Party by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism.
Shit. Okay, hey. How's it going, you tubers? I'm Coy the Third, here to talk about, today we're going to go over Jurassic Park, or Jurassic Revolution. The Marxist revolution that is Jurassic Park, the 1993 film. So, I wrote this as a thesis paper in grade 12, end of high school. I took philosophy class. We had to compare two texts. They went together quite well. Unfortunately, I lost the original, so this is going to be a video reboot of the idea. Before we get started, I just want to let you know Jurassic Park is one of my favorite movies of all time. I think it's pretty much as close to a perfect film as you can get. And if this idea disturbs or offends you or upsets you, or you think it might ruin Jurassic Park for you, please stop now. That's totally cool. I don't want to ruin an amazing film for you if that's what you also enjoy. But just so you know, this allegory is, it's also too perfect. Almost like it was intentional. I see you, Spiely. So finally, spoiler warning, 28-year-old film. Jesus. And I'm just going to go through it. We're not leaving any stone uncovered. Okay, so the briefest of overviews. I haven't seen Jurassic Park, the movie, in about 3 or 4 years, but I watched it as close to religiously as you can for many years. So I'm just going to run through a quick summary as much as I can remember without doing any research. This is going to be as fun for me as it will be for you, and maybe you just want to skip ahead if you are already bored. But basically, Jurassic Park is the idea of a super rich dude who owns a genetic engineering company. He uses the technology to create a theme park called Jurassic Park, where he is growing dinosaurs, basically. And he's done all the work. Everything's ready to go. He just has to bring in a few last people for a weekend to sign off on the park, basically for the lawyers to allow him to get insurance so that he can officially open it to the public. So the people who we have coming along, this is a classic Michael Crichton setup, who is the author of the original book. He brings along the paleontologist, the paleobotanist, who are our heroes. He brings along a mathematician because it was the 90s, and a lawyer. It's an interesting group. He also brings along his 2 grandchildren, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but mostly, just an example of how entirely irresponsible this guy is. Needless to say, things go wrong. The dinosaurs get out. Chaos ensues.
It's the essence of chaos.
And it's just a great romp through an incredible action movie. That's basically the story. Yada, 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 they get out. Some people die. So there you go. That's the overview. We're going to go into a lot more details and specifics as we go on through the video. But we should also cover the Communist Manifesto. So the Communist Manifesto was written by Karl Marx. If you want to learn more about it specifically, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about its cultural relevance or significance or, all the details of everything. It's very accessible and available online. And I'll link to 1 or 2, I haven't decided yet, videos about, describing what it is in the description below. Hopefully I'll get to that. This future me problem. All that we need to know, though, is that the Communist Manifesto was written by Karl Marx, who is kind of the granddaddy poppy of communism. It was the first official document that kind of unified a growing political movement that was communism, and he wanted to kind of give it an official manifesto. So he wrote that down around 1840s, as I said, not covering the details there. But We just want to cover those two texts to let you know that these are the two texts I'm going to be comparing. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the actual thesis of it. So private property. Private property, the entire movie takes place on Isla Nebular, I believe.
I own an island. Really spectacular, spared no expense.
This is an island that has been purchased.
I've leased it from the government.
We start off in a setting that is a entirely natural environment, this island that is kind of untouched by civilization, quote unquote, but yet it is also private property. In the Communist Manifesto, he talks about the abolition of private property. So the many by the few. We have a lot of dinosaurs and we have a few people. And that's what we're going to be talking about. The basic idea is humans are the bourgeoisie.
We can charge anything we want, $2,000 a day, $10,000 a day, and people will pay it.
And the dinosaurs are the proletariats. They're the workers. So the entire story of Jurassic Park is an allegory for a Marxist revolution. This island is kind of an example of the complete success of the bourgeoisie class in terms of exploitation of labor, exploitation of resources, and one that all land has been privatized. All land is owned by someone. Who is it owned by? This is where we get into Hammond. Hammond is the embodiment of patriarchal capitalism. That is his character in this reading. He is British identifying. He has the accent, though we're not sure where he's from.
I came down from Scotland.
If he's an expat from England or if he's still a British citizen, it's not really mentioned.
I came down from Scotland.
And it's not really important to the story. What is important is that he represents power.
Thanks, Dad.
And just as Marx says, capital is not only personal, it is social power. Hammond represents not only capital power in having seemingly endless funds, but the social power that comes with it. He has a lot of power implicit in his position. And I think the casting of Richard Attenborough, we see that he kind of brings that social capital of that old British class of colonialism, let's call it. But Hammond is interesting because all of his relationships through the movie exist through the relationship of capital, which is very much what Marx talks about with the bourgeoisie class. Hammond literally employs everyone on the island. Everyone who goes to the island is there because he's paying them to be there. Even our heroes are bribed, coerced.
We just dug up a new skeleton.
I could compensate you by fully funding your dig.
For a further 3 years.
We even have his grandchildren who show up.
You four are going to have a spot of company out in the park. Spend a little time with our target audience.
And the first thing they say...
We love the presents. They were
good
great.
to see you. Did you enjoy the helicopter?
kind of exemplifying the relationship with his grandchildren as being purely about gift giving and kind of purchasing their love. And he also arguably only has them there because they are the target audience, which he says. We also see in the Communist Manifesto, the bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage laborers. And we see that through all of our characters. We have, I believe it's Dr. Wu, who is the lead scientist at Jurassic Park. He is just a laborer, and he exists purely to operate within the whims of his boss.
I'd hoped they'd hatch before I had to go to the boat.
Henry, why didn't you tell me? I insist on being here when they're born.
Proving that this guy, even though he has all the knowledge, even though he's the one running the hatchery, he has absolutely no real agency over his work. He's just a laborer. And we also see that with, I mean, very literally the lawyer character.
Your investors, whom I represent, are deeply concerned. 48 hours from now, if they're not convinced, I'm not convinced. I shut you down, John.
And once again, the mathematician, the paleontologist, the paleobotanist, these are all experts in their fields. and they've been converted into purely paid wage laborers. Hammond has this belief that the expenditure of capital can solve all of his problems.
Hiring Nedry was a mistake. That's obvious. We're over-dependent on automation. I can see that now. Now, the next time, everything's correctable.
And I think that's a really interesting scene that we see.
Creation is an act of sheer will. Next time, it'll be flawless.
From his character's perspective, the exercise of will is also equivalent to expenditure of capital. He's constantly believing that with just enough capital, he can have enough power to do whatever he believes. What's wonderful about this is it falls directly in line with what Marx talks about in the Communist Manifesto, which is how the bourgeoisie class just expends more capital, and by doing that, they are, quote, paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby these crises are prevented. So the complexity of the park itself,
Item 151 on today's glitch list,
required a huge amount of capital, but that is also what makes it flawed and susceptible to the crisis that arrives, which is chaos.
It's the essence of chaos.
Quite literally, it's a storm. And that storm is what sets off this cascading failure, which leads to the revolution. Additionally, his wanting to only hire Nedry for security.
You know anybody who can network 8 connection machines and debug 2 million lines of code for what I bid for this job?
But very clearly, Nedry is absolutely essential for the security and the operations of the park.
I'm totally unappreciated in my time.
Marx talks a lot about the idea that this excess of production is actually detrimental to the bourgeoisie class, and so they actually destroy excess capital and restrict it. We see how Hammond could have hired more developers, more technical workers, more coders.
And I can see that now.
Instead of having Nedry as the sole person, which then creates this weakness in the system. So it's this constant idea that the bourgeoisie class is creating their own weaknesses, and they're also going to be creating the means to their own destruction. And that gets us to our next point, which is that the dinosaurs are both the proletariats and they are the tools of the revolution. So this is kind of the most tenuous connection of the thesis. This is where it all connects in a big way. So this is where hopefully I reaffirm how awesome this idea is. As it's quoted in the Communist Manifesto, the proletariat goes through various stages of development. With its birth begins its struggle with the bourgeoisie. At first, against the individual bourgeoisie who directly exploit them. Now and then the workers are victorious, but only for a time. Literally the first scene we have in the movie is our proletariat dinosaur, the raptor, lashing out on the individual bourgeoisie who is exploiting her. And she wins for a time, but then is shot, unfortunately. So there's a real, as I was saying, tenuous connection here, which is the relationship between the tools with which these workers will take power and the workers themselves. And how can we connect them into the same thing? How is the dinosaurs, how are they both the workers and the tools? Well, the tool is, and the industry that we are looking at specifically in Jurassic Park, is genetic engineering.
Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
So the dinosaurs are the products and the tools. We also know this because of how Nedry ends up stealing the genetics of the dinosaurs to competition.
Dodgson! Dodgson! We've got Dodgson here!
Which relates to the quote, a class of laborers, the dinosaurs, who live only so long as they find work. Who find work only so long as their labor increases capital. These laborers, who must sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity, like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition.
750.
On delivery, 50,000 more for each viable embryo. That's 1.5 million if you get all 15 species off the island.
The proletariats are the commodity. The dinosaurs are the commodity. They are there to be viewed. Their very existence produces capital for their owners, for the people who run the park. The entire purpose of the park is to have people pay to see them.
We can charge anything we want, 2,000 a day, 10,000 a day, and people will pay it.
So their very existence is a commodity that is being taken advantage of. There is no value in the life of the laborers. If they can't increase capital, we assume that the dinosaurs, for example, there's a lot of dinosaurs we don't see. Those dinosaurs have not been created for the park because they had no potential to increase capital. We also have this interesting idea of the merchandising.
You patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You're selling it.
It's quite ironic because the merchandising became such a big deal in the real world, but even in the movie, in the world of Jurassic Park, you saw in the background all of the merchandising and the lunch bags and all this sort of stuff. I found that really interesting, especially within this reading of the text, because Spielberg worked obviously very closely with his buddy George Lucas, and Star Wars was probably the first film to have massive merchandising attached to it.
Merchandising, where the real money from the movie is made.
So Spielberg really did see from the back end, I would assume, being friends with Lucas, what merchandising did to the story of Star Wars, and how merchandising affected the story. It commodified the story even more than the fact that it was a movie that you would pay to go see. We see a lot of references to this in the Communist Manifesto. He talks about the proletarian becomes an appendage of the machine, and it is only the most simple, most monotonous, most easily acquired knack that is required. Well, if we look at the dinosaurs as both the workers and as these proletarians, the most easily required skill, the most monotonous, most simple thing is to stay alive. That literally is their labor. That's what they have to do. They have to exist within their cages and be visible.
Now eventually you do plan to have dinosaurs on your dinosaur tour, right?
They are entirely disconnected and alienated from their labor.
T-Rex doesn't want to be fat. He wants to hunt. Just suppress 65 million years of gut instinct.
Because their labor is to exist, and yet it is to exist in a way that is not natural. And that's what they end up fighting out from.
Or how could you ever assume that you can control it? You have plants in this building that are poisonous. You pick them because they look good. But these are aggressive living things that have no idea what century they're in, and they'll defend themselves violently if necessary.
Not only are they, the proletariat, slaves of the bourgeois class and of the state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine, by the onlooker.
See, the Tyrannosaur doesn't obey any set patterns or park schedules. It's the essence of chaos.
They are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine that is the park, the machines that create them. Their life is mechanized. They come out of the lab, and they are enslaved by the onlooker. They exist purely to be viewed by people just coming and paying to be there, by Hammond, who's the manufacturer himself. And he clearly and openly proclaims,
Make the one I've got down in Kenya look like a petting zoo. And there's no doubt our attractions will drive kids out of their minds.
It is his end. That is purely his end, for them to be viewed. And that is extremely petty. And of course, we see that the dinosaurs, especially the carnivores, are extremely embittered and hateful about this. I think the raptors are a wonderful example.
They should all be destroyed.
Of that, as well as, of course, the T-Rex. We could wade into talking about how the raptor pack represents unions, and how the Communist Manifesto does talk about how unions are the main tool through which workers can gain power, through which to fight the bourgeois class. We see that in the movie, in that the raptors are the most dangerous elements to the humans.
They're lethal at 8 months, and I do mean lethal.
In the same way that Marx talks about, while all laborers are kind of these proletariats, not all of them are communists, and that the communists, their objective is the objective of the betterment of all the laborers. So if we want to get into the eating habits of some of our dinosaurs.
It's okay. It's a brachiosaur.
It's a Vegisaurus, Lex Vegisaurus.
A lot of them are kind of living their lives and doing their thing, and they're not attacking the bourgeoisie class. But the ones that do, their success equals the freedom of their herbivore brothers and sisters or cousins. Of course, I've already kind of mentioned this, but yeah, the bourgeoisie itself furnishes the proletariat with weapons for fighting the bourgeoisie. I think we have wonderful scenes.
What species is this?
It's a velociraptor.
When the experts realize you have...
T-Rex?
Mm-hmm.
You said you've got a T-Rex?
Uh-huh.
Say again.
We have a T-Rex.
They didn't have to do that. But, of course, the bourgeoisie itself furnishes the proletariat with weapons for fighting the bourgeoisie. So the revolution. In the Communist Manifesto, he doesn't really talk too much about the revolution.
I read between the lines.
In Jurassic Park, we see what the revolution looks like. This revolution, which is horrifying.
It's the essence of chaos.
They are the victims of the very things they created. This is exactly the horrors that capitalists and the bourgeoisie class live with today when they fear a communist revolution. Now, we can look at it from different perspectives, and Marx would argue specifically that one text, that loss of life is not guaranteed. In terms of this allegory, they are synonymous. And I think we can agree that that's the intention of the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are sick and tired of 1/10 of the people owning 9/10 of the property, or in this case, all of the property. And part of their revolution is getting ownership of their land, and in so doing also destroying the boundaries which separate them. As the fences literally come down in the park, there is this cascading potentiality and then actuality of revolution and freedom for all the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs take over the entire island and live in a commune, as it were. So there is this wonderful, once again, another lovely quote. You must therefore confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, and this person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Which in this allegory of Jurassic Park is being killed, or being literally swept out of the way off the island. And some of them do get away, of course. Our heroes live. And this is an interesting way to end. We see that Dr. Grant is cut off from the rest of the bourgeoisie during the violence that ensues, which is the active revolution. And through his time cut off, and he already is kind of susceptible, obviously, to being compassionate and empathetic to these dinosaurs, to the communists. But he really does join their struggle. He is a supporter of dinosaurs. He loves them, and so when he sees that they're just trying to live...
After careful consideration, I've decided not to endorse your park.
I think one last thing that one other thing that we see in terms of connecting the how the laborers kind of take back control of production from the bourgeoisie is...
amphibian DNA.
The dinosaurs are able to reproduce themselves. As I said, the very industry that we're talking about is genetics, and that the dinosaurs have no control over their own genetics. But of course...
life finds a way.
That very act is taking back the instruments of production. Okay, so that was my little retelling, very quickly, of Jurassic Park as an allegory for a Marxist revolution. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun getting to talk through it again. I wish I still had the original paper, although probably would have been really embarrassed reading it. And thank you for watching. I'm assuming if you're seeing this, you did. And